Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 186.
As a good person once told me, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that when you see contributions from people out in the industry, like you said, JD, just something simple, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be, you went and wrote a Python program to do X, Y, or Z to control, 1,000 access points, or, you had to do something massively complicated. It could just be something simple like, hey, this is a tip that I learned a long time ago. It's something that I thought I would share. Write a blog post, right? Be on a podcast, something, just to get that out there. And, the community is very receptive. And I think each of us, even those that have been around, for a long time in the industry, not just those that are new to the industry, oftentimes see those things and are appreciative, those contributions.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Welcome to Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast. My name is Keith Parsons, and today I've got the Wi-Fi Awards folks with us. We have Samuel Clements, JD, and we have Tawni's actually going to talk today. So we have a bunch of people here, and we'll be talking about the Wi-Fi Awards, what the committee has formed, why it's there, and why we're going to be sharing it with you all.
All right. Welcome, Sam, JD, Keith, Tauni. It's good to hear you all again, I guess, on this lovely podcast episode. So we're here with the Wi-Fi Awards team, everyone. Tauni, how about you take the lead and let us all know how the Wi-Fi Awards came to life and kind of a little bit about what the initial idea started as and what it is now.
Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting thing. I was having a conversation with a coworker, and we were talking about a product that the company, my employer, had brought to market. And we thought, it's really innovative. It's very cool. What can we do to promote it and better position it in the market? And so I started doing some research at the time, fulfilling a marketing need. And I looked, couldn't find anything really that I thought was really interesting. And then I had an idea. There should be an awards program. So I started looking to see what kind of awards there were available that we could submit the product for. And I couldn't really find anything that was related to our industry that was a cohesive program. There were bits and pieces here and there. And so, well, why not start an awards program? And why not get, some folks together? And so I reached out to Keith and JD and Sam, and I said, hey, what do you guys think? Am I way off base? Is this crazy? And that's kind of how it started. And so the collaboration of the four of us together, and it has evolved into what it is. So the Wi-Fi Awards program is that's basically what it is. It's a program to recognize the excellence that is coming out of our community, because there are a lot of amazing companies, a lot of amazing products, and some outstanding people that really deserve recognition, who work very hard every day to make the world a wireless, full, wonderful place. So that's kind of how it started. That's kind of how it came to be.
Wireless full. Can you spell that for the audience?
I do make up words. So, instead of wonderful, it's wireless full.
Gotcha. Cool. So JD, tell me a little bit more about this. So how does the Wi-Fi Awards work? What are we talking about as far as, categories and things of that nature?
Sure. Okay. So the great thing about the Wi-Fi Awards is that while the group of us that are here on this podcast are obviously heavily involved and have kind of some oversight, we're also very community driven. So that's going to be the key thing to understand before we go any further. So we're wanting the community to submit applications, whether it's for something that they've done or something that some of the company's done that they just simply are a fan of or know of, or maybe it's and I guess getting into the categories themselves. What we're looking at is we're looking to recognize companies, products, and then probably my favorite area is the people and / individual awards. Those are kind of the categories that things fall into. And so we're really looking at the community to do those nominations. It will also go back to the community for voting. So that's from the very beginning. That's the thing for everyone to understand is this isn't, JD, Sam, Keith making decisions on who gets the awards. This is us kind of herding the community through making these decisions.
Okay, and you brought up a good point. So you talked about you, Sam, and Keith making the decision. So, can you tell us a little bit about the committee members? I mean, I'm assuming that you three are on that committee and kind of the process that you three will look at when evaluating recommendations for these different awards.
Sure. Actually, pass that to somebody else. Let someone else take that.
Okay, Sam?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to make something up. No, I think, yeah, it's when, just to sort of echo what JD said, was we started off this being very, very community driven, meaning we expect the community to obviously provide nominations for us to then down select. And then, much like we would see, other awards programs that may be popular, we expect to internally collaborate together to come up with sort of a distilled list, if you will, of, we expect obviously there to be a large number of nominations to come in. We look to distill that down to a small number that ultimately the community can then come back to and then vote, much like you would vote for, a favorite movie of the year, favorite actor of the year. And so, obviously this being the first year that we're doing this, where I think that, I'm really excited to see what that process looks like as we, go through and talk about what those nominees look like and ultimately how we come up with a down selection of a select number of individuals. I suspect that, obviously working closely with JD and Keith on what that looks like, I think that we'll probably coalesce on a list probably pretty quickly. But yeah, I don't know that there is a formal process yet today that we expect to sort of go through, but we've given ourselves some time in between the nominations that are opening up here very, very shortly and the actual voting that's going to be taking place by the community in order to sort of sort through that and fill that out.
Okay, that's good to note. So the committee is really just there to kind of filter through all of the nominations and kind of create a subset for the community itself to vote on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we don't want to do is we don't want to get ourselves into a situation where we have, 100, nominations for product of the year, right? That would just be too cumbersome. And I think it dilutes sort of the intention behind, the Wi-Fi awards just in general. So yeah, absolutely. I think really what I see our role as is providing that sort of steering to say, we collectively think these represent sort of the best of the best in the industry. And then that's where we come back to the community to say, tell us what you think.
So Keith, talk to us a little bit about kind of the different awards that you envision, being a part of this and some of the categories maybe and all, to just give people a little preview of, what we can be expecting.
So there's 6 major awards. The first category is for company, and it's Leadership of the Year. So it's a company that's shown leadership in our industry. There's 2 product awards, one for Product of the Year and Innovation of the Year. We kind of split that because something might be the best product of the year, but something else might be more innovative, though it didn't have commercial success. And commercial success is not the only criteria for the product of the year. But we're just gonna, like Sam said, winnow down the big list into just a smaller subset so that people can vote on what those. And then there's 2 specific people or individual awards. One's for Rookie of the Year. And we've already had questions like, well, what counts as a rookie? If I've been doing this for 10 years, am I still a rookie, or 3 or 5 or 2? And we'll see when people, I don't think it's a 35 months and then you can't do it anymore. I think it's more of if you're new to the industry, and we've seen some people get in the industry and in their first year go from, 0 to being a rock star. And we want to applaud that. But there's also people who have done more, and they might not be a rookie, but they've done a lot. So we have a content contribution of the year for somebody who's provided a lot of content and helped to everyone else. And then the final one is the Lifetime Achievement Award. This is not one that's you voted on. It's one that's just been assigned. We're not taking nominations. We'll look at that elsewhere. And that's kind of on my shoulders to make that decision. And I do not take bribes. So those are words we're looking at. And what we found was in doing the WLPC sessions, we took all of the list, and it's, hundreds, and we break it down into categories, and we have people vote on it, and the voting ones get to present. And it's been very effective with the community to get people kind of what they want. So we thought if we followed that same voting strategy here, then we could use the community to help source and come up with the best answer for these awards.
Okay. And speaking about voting, so is this something that, a community member can vote on multiple times, or is this something that's going to be kind of a ballot? You vote once and then we kind of whittle down and vote again? Or how do you envision that process working?
Personally, I don't think the whole, we have enough smart people in the community who can figure out how to beat systems and have, bots, whatever they want to do it. So we'll try to make it as fair as possible without being overly crazy on it. Knowing that people could, go tell all their friends, everyone vote for me. And that, it's kind of hard to stop that kind of process. But if everyone votes for them, they did count for votes. But we will put some pieces in place that the same MAC address, the same person can't vote multiple times.
So I guess that means that I should just go ahead and stop writing that Python program with list comprehension that Ryan Adsma loves so much to vote for me multiple times.
If you can make that work.
If you can make that work, yeah, I think that qualifies as Innovation of the Year.
I didn't know you had that kind of Python skill yet. You might win because of that.
I got really good taking the Python class this past WLPC. Okay, so we will submit nominations from September 15th to October 15th. Then the committee will take over for a month to do their job, and then we're going to vote November 16th. So, we're not talking about the, first or second Tuesday of November here in the U.S. We're talking about after November 16th. So it looks like, I see some opportunities for sponsors around this. Keith, do you want to kind of tell us how the sponsor opportunities, if they exist for Wi-Fi Awards, how those work?
Sure. Yeah. From the sponsor standpoint, one, we'd love to have prizes, gifts for the winners. In fact, we'd love to have gifts for all the 5 nominations for each. In the company category, there's not much. Obviously, you're going to get a prize, something you'd hang in your wall, not just a certificate, but some sort of physical manifestation of the award. But for the individuals, they might want to, have some nice toys to play with. So if you're a company that makes something, you'd like to have it shared and out with the public, and we'll hand them out during the award ceremony. We're offering a fantastic package for sponsors. You'll get your logo featured on the website. Woo, yes. And during the awards presentation, we'll talk about you as well. And then obviously between all of us, we have different podcasts, and we'll interview each of the podcast, all the sponsors of the Wi-Fi Awards on various podcasts. So it's a kind of a social media thing. We're not giving people, if you pay cash for this, you get something else. We're just saying we'll be providing, if we have no sponsors, we will still have all the awards. Everything will work exactly the same. We're just saying if we can come up with, if you want to get your thing out there, like if you make an AP, I think the individual awards would love to have get a free AP out of the process, and you get to say, hey, Rookie of the Year has our new AP, or things like that. So nothing. We're not trying to do any kind of bait and switch, or if you sponsor, you get all these great benefits. We realize there's not a lot of great benefits. There's just, you get to be part of this whole process. If you have submitted or someone submitted your company for an award, does not preclude you from sponsoring something, but we're trying to make it not look, like it was a tit for tat kind of thing. And nor will those sponsorships be broadcast prior to voting, because we don't want people to think that it's tied to there. But definitely at the award ceremony, we'll be pushing that. Any of the others want to talk about that? Was kind of my little take on the sponsorship thing. Anyone else?
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I think you've sort of hit on 2 topics just over the past couple of questions, and I keep coming back to, as we were sort of building the program, we obviously had a lot of dialogue about how things could be structured or built or whatever. And I think that anytime there was sort of a conversation around how well we could go through path A or path B, every single time it came down to, well, this is about the community and what's best for the community, and what can we do to make sure that this is as equitable and as fair as possible for the community. And I think that shows very, very strongly. I think even just what Keith had just got done saying about, the awards and the sponsorship and all of that fun stuff, it really does. I think everything that we've done so far, it comes back to this is for the community, by the community. And that's something that resonates every single time we meet and we talk about, and we figure out what are we going to do next and what do we have to do, and so on and so forth. And that's, I think, something that we talked about at WLPC when JD and I were on stage and we, launched the Wi-Fi Awards, is that this really is by and for you, the listener. We expect you to contribute. We expect you to nominate. We expect you to vote. We expect you to play a heavy role in making sure that you get your wireless and professional buddy that's sitting next to you to go and say, hey, don't forget, go participate in this thing. It really is about all of you. And I think that's really the thing that makes it stand out. And that's the thing that I think that makes me most excited about being involved in the program. And I think that's echoed very well in what Keith just got done saying.
Well, I'm glad I went through. That's the core. It's how do we build the community even more? And I think part of it is, as a community, we're kind of growing up, and this Wi-Fi Awards is just kind of a next step in an industry growing and supporting and applauding and giving kudos to their own.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's I think all of us can think back on a tool or utility or something that has kind of changed the way we do our job. Something that is kind of old enough now that it doesn't really apply, but within the last few months, I finally got a Sidekick, and so now I'm surveying on an iPad, and that for my workflow is completely job changing. Right? It makes things go faster. It's simpler. It's easier to carry. So we all have those tools that in the back of our mind, they come out and we go, this really changes things. Recently, Sam and I helped launch Transfer from Adrian. I used it yesterday to, put an image on a local image on an access point, like a 3702 or 2702 AP. When doing Anycast TFTP, it was just so simple and so easy, and that's not something that previously we could do. So we've all experienced those moments where there's something that comes into our career, into our work life, that makes our job easier, that makes reduces frustration, or whatever that may be, or maybe it's maybe it's cheat sheets that someone created, or blog posts that someone created. Those are the things that ultimately, as a community, we all benefit from. And it's all about the sole focus that we've had here is ensuring that we are nominating and talking about those things. It's not about the awards. It's not about the companies that sponsor the awards. It's about those things that make our lives better.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that each of you have touched on is, we oftentimes forget, just how dependent upon other members of the community we all are, and as a good person once told me, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that when you see contributions from people out in the industry, like you said, JD, just something simple, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be, you went and wrote a Python program to do X, Y, or Z to control, 1,000 access points, or, you had to do something massively complicated. It could just be something simple like, hey, this is a tip that I learned a long time ago. It's something that I thought I would share. Write a blog post, right? Be on a podcast, something, just to get that out there. And, the community is very receptive. And I think each of us, even those that have been around, for a long time in the industry, not just those that are new to the industry, oftentimes see those things and are appreciative of, those contributions. So I definitely, commend each of you for kind of thinking about this and putting this together and bringing it to the community.
Well, and Scott, I think you also came close to touching on something that I think is important as well, which is, the committee, we don't know everything that everybody's doing. And so if you find yourself looking at an award category going, gosh, I don't know, should I nominate Bill for doing this thing that I read? do it, right? That's ultimately our job, is going to be to go and distill those things down. As far as I'm concerned, I'm hopeful that we get flooded with, hundreds of submissions for each category, that we really have to, stop and take time to do our job, to go, okay, well, this really belongs over here. This should be, sort of ranked like this. I'm super excited about digging into all of those and saying, I didn't know about fill in the blank. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the community brings.
I think that's going to be a real interesting part of this. I certainly know that I know very little in the whole scheme of things, and the tools that people use, and the ways they go about things. And I'm excited to see what other people find valuable, right? Because I feel like as community member, as a contributor into the community, maybe, but really nothing more than that. I think I'm going to learn a lot from that, and I expect and hope other people do also. So even those people who maybe it's someone or a product or something that doesn't get necessarily receive an award at the end, if they're also if more people are aware of that, I think that's going to be really key, and kind of, again, helping the community as a whole grow and function. I'll touch on one. I want to touch on one area that I'm actually really excited about. The Rookie of the Year, it kind of rings with me personally, because when I can think back to when I was kind of starting in networking and started blogging and started contributing in the community, and this wasn't even Wi-Fi. This was more LAN and WAN and data center and that type of thing. But the reason I'm kind of passionate about that is based on that work that I did, and based on what I was contributing to the community, is the reason that I developed all of the relationships I did. And I'm super excited about the fact that there are other people out there who are having that same experience, who are coming into the community, who are contributing, who are kind of having their voice heard a little bit. Maybe they're getting a little bit of pushback, and they're kind of refining their beliefs and their views and their experience and all of that in the process. And I'm really excited about us being able to point at those people and go, hey, this guy gets it. This guy or girl or this person, is understands, number one, that a technology, whatever that may be, but also they understand the value of the community, and they're putting back into the community. So I think that's I think really across the whole board, I think that's really what we're looking for. But I'm excited to see kind of all of that float to the surface through this process.
Yeah, JD, I think you touched on something there. Sometimes just that little, acknowledgement, maybe, doesn't even have to have anything, formal attached to it. A certificate or award is great. Don't get me wrong. But sometimes I think just that little nudge to some of the people new to the industry helps push them. And, I can speak to that firsthand. My first WLPC was just a few years ago. And, before I knew most all of you, it was one of those things where, you're kind of by yourself, you don't really know what to expect and all, but once you start contributing to the community, people start, talking about your blog post or something of that nature, right? It does kind of help encourage you to kind of continue on. And then you learn that, we're all out here to help each other and not just kind of keep information to ourselves. And I think ultimately that's what I like to see the most out of this effort, is just, community building and helping to show others out there, right, that we're all here to help each other, and no contribution is too small, like Sam mentioned earlier. So just, kind of going back on things, we talked a little bit about the sponsorships. We kind of talked about what the awards process, submissions are, and what the awards and categories are. Keith, is this kind of going to be a part of WLPC, or, because I know there may be some questions around that, or is this kind of like its separate little entity off by itself?
Wi-Fi Awards is not part of WLPC. They're two separate entities. But I volunteered and offered to have WPC be the place for the award ceremony. We were holding Wireless LAN Professionals Awards, and I'm going to stop doing that. And so that process has gone away, and it'll be replaced with this Wi-Fi Awards. If the committee chooses to hold it at a different location, I'm good with that. We just happen to have a place where there's a couple hundred of our fellows all together at the same time, and we just chose to do the announcement there. if in the future we have something bigger or better to do it, it's not tied to WLPC.
Okay, good deal. I could definitely envision, Sam showing up in a tuxedo, Thursday night prior to Whiskey and Wi-Fi, having just come from the awards ceremony.
He would have his tuxedo, skirt that he wears.
Yeah, the committee is going to wear kilts.
Oh, it's not called
Tuxedo
it's called a kilt. Oh,
yeah,
oh,
kilt.
it's a tuxedo kilt. I thought it was a formal skirt.
Be careful there, Keith, because you're also on the committee, so that includes you as well.
So before we, the train completely derails off the tracks. So, we've kind of touched on everything, but for those of you listening that maybe, haven't quite gotten it in your head, what the dates are for this, because I know it's one of the things that I always typically forget. Go ahead and mark it on your calendars now. So submissions for the Wi-Fi Awards will take place from September 15th through October 15th. And then voting will begin a few weeks thereafter on November 16th and run through December the 16th. So be sure to get your nominations in early and often, and don't be afraid. Like we said, no contribution is too small. So, folks, before we head off into the sunset, any last thoughts on the Wi-Fi Awards?
So they can go to the WiFiAwards.com. All of the information that we talked about today is there. Also on Twitter at the Wi-Fi Awards. You can reach out to us. You can info at the Wi-Fi Awards. There's a lot of different ways, but I would start with the website and go from there. But I will say, for those of us in the industry, sometimes I think there's a lot of folks in our industry who have imposter syndrome and we don't think we deserve something. But please, please, please nominate yourself, submit for yourself, or someone else, because the reality is we have a lot of amazing people who are doing a lot of really wonderful things, wirelessful things, right? My new word, in our industry. And I think it's, just keep that in mind, that we don't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be, that you solve the world's problems, but feel free to nominate yourself. And if, you think your friend is doing something really, really cool, share with us, because as Sam alluded to earlier, we don't know what everybody's doing, and that's one of the things we want to do, is bring to light the very, very cool, innovative things that folks are doing. So, all
right, well, folks, I encourage you to check out the WiFiAwards.com. Follow them on Twitter. There's even a few little tidbits about some of the committee members, things you may not know about them. So, encourage you to check that out at your earliest convenience. Sam, JD, Keith, Tauni, thank you for joining us.
10 Talks.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed lunch. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to explain what you need to know about 802.11ad and 802.11ay, which is 60 gigahertz. Standard disclaimer, because I've been known to get up on stages and declare things dead. 60 gigahertz is not dead. Standard disclaimer. So I want to take the next few minutes and talk to you about how the standard works for 802.11ad, and then explain what's going to be changing in 802.11ay. There isn't a lot of AD product out on the market. I know a couple of vendors in the room have AD. I know people are working on AY. I will not tell you about what LegalWave is doing on 60 gigahertz, but we're certainly looking at it, which is why I'm up here talking about it. The key thing that I want you to remember, though, about 60 gigahertz is that it's directional. And the entire spec is actually centered around the fact that it is a directional Wi-Fi protocol, which makes it very different from what we're used to on the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Why? There are kind of two main use cases, point-to-point or point-to-multipoint, as well as room-level Wi-Fi. So at 60 gigahertz, I can't actually pass through walls like I can with 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So any of you who want to do 1 AP per classroom, 60 gigahertz is a good idea for 1 AP per classroom, because it ain't getting into the next classroom. For point-to-point and point-to-multipoint, it also means that I could put neighboring base stations really close together to each other, and they're not going to interfere with each other, which is actually a really nice thing when you're doing point-to-point and point-to-multipoint. Key thing is the fact that it's directional. In fact, the PHY is actually called DMG, directional multi-gigabit. Data rates are promised up to 8 gigabits per second. This is achieved basically because I'm using nice, big, fat 2 gigahertz channels, really big channels. That's how I get the speeds. The PHY type itself is actually very simple. It's actually much simpler than what we're used to working with. It's single carrier PHY. The original spec had OFDM in it, but the chipsets don't actually support OFDM for 802.11ad, so you're not going to see OFDM in 802.11ad. They use a phased antenna array for real-time beamforming. And it's single stream. It's not MIMO. It's not multi-user MIMO. It's single stream. I mean, this is, we're going back to 802.11, BG kind of days with this kind of stuff. And the chipsets currently are generally limited for like 1 AP and like up to 8 client devices, which doesn't make it terribly useful for Wi-Fi. It does make it really useful though for point-to-point and point-to-multipoint applications. The principle, at least for an omnidirectional access point, is that you would search by sectors, and I would use beamforming in order to determine kind of where the client is, and then I'm going to transmit all of my data based on directing the beam of the access point right to my client. There are now 6 channels available, ranging from, originally the spec went from 57 to 66 gigahertz. It's been extended to 71 gigahertz, at least in the US. Canada and the EU will hopefully be following along in the next couple of years. But worldwide, there are actually only 2 channels that are universal, which are channels 2 and 3. Now, why are we talking about 60? Like, why haven't people used 60 gigahertz before? It's because it's a pain in the butt to actually work with. For those of you who haven't seen this type of curve before, the blue line is water absorption. The purple line is oxygen absorption. And you'll notice the fact that the peak of the oxygen absorption curve, if you look at it very carefully, it may be hard to see in the back, but it really falls out in that kind of 57 to 66 gigahertz range is that peak, which means that you actually are losing signal just by going through the air, and that the oxygen in the air is actually absorbing the signal, which really limits its range. Now, as you get beyond like 65, 66 gigahertz, it actually dips back down again, which is why those high channels, in the upper range of the 65 to 70 gigahertz are actually really interesting, because I won't have as much of the oxygen absorption kind of issue there. Again, this is something that we're not used to dealing with as Wi-Fi engineers on the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz band. So what does this mean? This means that you're going to have limited range in the air, and you're going to have a large degradation of your performance from weather effects. So one of the other things that, because of the water curve, right, every time we're used to ignoring rain and snow and fog, right? At 5 gigahertz, we don't care about those things. At above about 20 gigahertz, you start caring, and 60 gigahertz, you actually really care, which means that the performance of your link is not constant. It depends on what the weather is doing. And from a design perspective, that also very much limits its application. In terms of the PHY, right, the PHY is going to look like a typical 802.11 PHY, right? You've got a preamble, which has the short training field, right? Channel estimation stuff for actually determining what the channel looks like in order to get everybody in sync. I've got the header, which is going to tell me, okay, what MCS scheme am I using, right? I've got my actual data. And then at the end, you've got something a little bit different. You have what's called the beamforming training field. Remember I told you everything was directional? And 60 gigahertz utilizes beamforming something fierce in order to keep it directional. So that beamforming training field, for those of you who are familiar with multi-user MIMO, right, and trying to figure out where the clients are with respect to the AP, this is heavily embedded within the 60 gigahertz profile, because you need to actually send out those training fields to get the responses of going, where is the client with respect to me, the access point, so that I know what direction I should focus my antenna arrays. In terms of MCS rates, we're only going BPSK, QPSK, and 16 QAM. The coding is also relatively unaggressive. The control PHY is going to be, very, very basic. That's kind of your beacon rate PHY. and also for your beam training forming. So this is basically, okay, I'm sending out data at the slowest data rates in order to figure out where everything is. And it's single carrier PHY, so it's intended for, mobile client devices. It's intended for low complexity, and it's intended for power efficiency. Turns out OFDM actually sucks up more power than single carrier PHY, but it ultimately leads to lower throughputs. Interesting thing about 802.11ad is that beacons work a little bit different because I no longer have a single beacon frame. I essentially have what's called a beacon transmission interval, where I'm transmitting a series of beacon frames across all of the directions that I'm trying to reach in order to try to reach all the clients, right? Because everything has to be done directionally, that means I actually have to transmit beacons in multiple directions. You then have your beamforming training. So, and that'll be for individual stations. So you have 8 slots. That's your 8 client limit. I have 8 slots for beamforming training in 802.11ad. That gets expanded up to 40 in 802.11ay. And then I have my announcement transmission interval, which is that the frame exchanges between the APs and my beam train stations. Then that's when I get into data transmission. So what's coming in 802.11ay? 802.11ay, you're probably going to see chipsets late this year, early next year in 802.11ay. This is promising much faster data rates. It was originally pitched as 100 gigabit per second wireless. It's probably going to be 20 to 40 gigabit per second wireless. You can do all of the things that we're kind of used to doing in like 802.11n and 802.11ac, like channel bonding and channel aggregation. Right, bonded channels are neighboring channels, aggregated channels are non-neighboring channels. It'll support MIMO and multi-user MIMO. It'll support up to 8 spatial streams, but it'll probably be 4, like if you actually look at the chipsets. It'll expand QAM to 64 and 256. It'll have it enhances some of the beamforming. You'll have a higher density client load, right, up to the 40, as I mentioned, and it will be backward compatible to 802.11ad. The PHY structure is going to look similarly to what we see in the PHY structures for, right, inherited generations when we go from B and G to N to AC, right? I'm going to have my legacy portion, right? And then I'm going to have my new portion, which is going to basically say, okay, if I'm using bonded channels, if I'm using MIMO, if I'm using multi-user MIMO, right, all of the specs kind of get woven into that to maintain the backward compatibility. And then, of course, you're still going to have the training field for beamforming. Modulation types, right? Again, 64 QAM, 256 QAM. This is the kind of stuff that's you're going to see. So in conclusion, takeaway messages. Primary benefits, very high bandwidth from your very large channels. I'm going to have virtually no interference. However, I get very high attenuation, which means it's very short range. And achieving and maintaining link alignment can be very, very challenging. So I'm going to wind up using real-time beamforming, small antenna arrays, and very limited angular beam width. Practical length limits probably on the order of about 1,000 feet or 300 meters. You'll see advertisements for larger than that. And I'm about 30 seconds over, so thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.